Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. Alright, so without a doubt, my favorite thing about Shadows of Brimstone is the theme and the setting. I am a huge fan of westerns, both straight westerns and weird westerns. Weird westerns are western stories that will mix in elements of horror, usually something like with the Cthulhu mythos, Lovecraftian horror, that kind of stuff, or with other elements of like science fiction. You can have like steampunk westerns, or straight horror, like with with werewolves and zombies and that kind of thing. Now I know that the western genre is a polarizing one. I think more so than with any other genre like science fiction or fantasy or horror or action. I hear more people just straight up say that they hate westerns, and I hardly ever hear anybody make a blanket statement about, I hate horror, or I hate science fiction, or I hate fantasy, or I hate action movies. But with westerns, there seems to be a large group of people who really dislike them and will never give them a chance. And I find that odd because of how, like, so many of my favorite things are westerns. I mean, my favorite book of all time is a straight western. My another book in my top 5 is a weird western. And my favorite book series of all time is a weird western. And my favorite movie of all time is a western. That would be Once Upon a Time in the West by Sergio Leone. Now, I am not an expert on westerns. For every western or weird western that I've read, there are dozens that I haven't read. Just Louis L'Amour's catalog in itself, I've probably only read a fifth of. There are dozens and dozens of westerns. Some of them not so good, some of them great, but I just wanted to give a brief overview of some great westerns and some great weird western fiction. Now, I know I have gotten quite a few requests recently to do more episodes on books. And I've been wanting to do this episode for quite some time. And so this is a really good opportunity for me. So I hope you guys enjoy this. And, tying it into board games with Shadows of Brimstone is something that I like to do. So as I said, my favorite book of all time is a straight western, and that is Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. This book, I've probably read it 4 times or so, clocking in at almost 1,000 pages. It's one of the longest books I've ever read, but this is an absolutely brilliant novel. Some of you may be more familiar with the pretty, in my opinion, lackluster television miniseries from back in the 80s, starring, who was it? Tommy Lee Jones and I can't remember who else starred, but I'm not a fan of the TV series, and that actually kept me away from reading the book for a long time. But I finally, one year I was just going to read like really long novels, and I had developed a taste for westerns, and Lonesome Dove is quite a long novel, and so I just decided to read it, and it completely just captured my imagination like almost no book ever has. The characters are fantastic. The story, if you need to trick yourself into reading a western, imagine this as being like Lord of the Rings set in the American West, because that's really what it feels like. It is just this epic adventure across this very dangerous land of a small group, a fellowship of cowboys. They have to take their herd of cattle from one place to another, and just the kind of adventures they get on the way. Just a fantastic series. It is a series, and I like almost every book in the series. And I also love Larry McMurtry. His book, The Last Picture Show, is fantastic. He's one of my favorite authors of straight, just non-genre style fiction. But yeah, Lonesome Dove is an incredible novel. I highly recommend it. Another good author of straight fiction, and one that you can buy just in this nice volume, is The Complete Western Stories of Elmore Leonard. So Elmore Leonard is mostly known as a writer of crime fiction, and a very good writer of crime fiction, but he also wrote some really good westerns, including the story 3:10 to Yuma. For many years, I only knew Elmore Leonard as a writer of crime fiction. I was not aware that he also wrote westerns. And so when this came out, I was very happy to pick it up. Now, I have not read every story in here, so I can't vouch for all of them. And with the kind of like these complete collections, there all probably will be some hit and miss stories in here. But for the ones I've read, I think are quite good, and I look forward to reading more. Then a couple other straight westerns. I think only one I have out so right now. This one is kind of the Oxbow Incident is just a brilliant book, super good. Kind of a psychological, it's kind of a story about the psychology of a mob, of a group of people in the Old West, and it's a classic, and rightly so. And then kind of moving into more of a genre feel is the Edge series, Edge the Loner by George G. Gilman. The Oxbow Incident was by Walter Van Tilburg Clark. When was that written? I think it was like the 60s, maybe even before. Let's see here. 1940. Yeah, 1940. So yeah, good old classic American literature there. But yeah, the Edge series is very much kind of an action series, and it's super violent. That's what it's known for. Kind of imagine if I'm surprised that Tarantino hasn't made a movie based on Edge the Loner or inspired by him. I think his Django movie is probably, I don't know, I would be surprised if Tarantino had not read any of the Edge the Loner books. I've only read a couple. There are many. They're hard to find. I think they're back in print, but whenever I find one at a used bookstore, I try to pick it up. Okay, now we're going to move into the Weird West. So I don't know if he would be considered the first author to do Weird West, but he's definitely one of the grandfathers, one of the godfathers of the Weird West. And that is, of course, Robert E. Howard, the author of Conan and creator of Conan. So if you go back with Weird Wests, I think you'll find a lot of the mythology is, taken from Lovecraftian horror, but it also mixes in Native American mythology. And a really good example of a Native American-based Weird Western is Louis L'Amour's The Haunted Mesa. And that's probably the first Weird West I read. And I read that as a kid because my grandpa loved Westerns, and he would always have stacks of Louis L'Amour books at his house, and when I would visit, I would pick a couple to read. But this book here by Robert E. Howard, The Vultures of Wahpeton, is one of the earlier Weird Wests that I read and purchased, and it is pretty good. It's not amazing. It's not like my favorite, but I liked it enough to want to, explore the genre more. And I need to find out more about Robert E. Howard's weird Western fiction. I'm surprised there's not like a big fat collected volume. But after reading that, the author that really got me like super into Weird West fiction would definitely be Joe R. Lansdale. And Joe R. Lansdale, for many, many years, his books were super out of print, super expensive, and just incredibly hard to find. Nowadays, almost all of his stuff is in print. You can go to like a regular bookstore and find Joe R. Lansdale on the shelf. When I was getting into him in the early 2000s, that was impossible. We had to search for his books and pay a lot of money. Most of them were only available in these like expensive signed small press versions. You could find some of his Happen Leonard stuff, but those were from these like European presses. And so we would, always be on the lookout for Joe R. Lansdale whenever we would go book shopping at used bookstores and collectible bookstores. Nowadays, all of his stuff, you can get it on Kindle. A lot of his stuff is like just in print. And I'm of two minds about that. I'm super glad that it's in print. I'm super glad he's selling well now because I like what he does, but it also has kind of tanked the market for all the collector's versions that I've spent way too much money on. And so my investment in Joe R. Lansdale fiction from a monetary standpoint has definitely taken a nosedive over the last few years, but it is great that his stuff is in print. So this was after the Haunted Mesa and the Robert E. Howard stories that I read earlier. This was probably the first book that I really thought about the Weird West as a genre that I really wanted to explore. And this is just a classic tale of just kind of like this like really kind of nasty priest type anti-hero and fighting off hordes of the undead. Now you can get this book now collected. I believe it's collected in here. Let's see here. Dead in the West. Yes, so you can get this book now collected in this collection, which is I think still in print. This is pretty recent, but this is Dead Man's Road, and this is kind of a collection of Lansdale's early Weird Wests, and in it you get Dead in the West, Dead Man's Road, The Gentleman Hotel, The Crawling Sky, and The Dark Down There. So very good collection. Highly recommend picking this up, especially if you're just wanting to get into and explore the Weird West. This is a fantastic volume to do so with. And then he also has Hell's Bounty, which that was written with his brother, I believe. John is his brother. Another one of his great Weird Wests, a more recent volume. Then he also has, with John again, was this book called Shadows West, which is a collection of 3 unfilmed screenplays. Again, this is one of those signed and numbered. Only 500 were made. This is number 305. But this includes screenplays for Riding with the Dead, Hell's Bounty, Dead Man's Road, and Dead in the West. So a lot of the stuff in these books he and John created screenplays for. Now, I don't think the screenplays have ever been optioned or made into movies or anything, but sometimes it is fun to read a screenplay like like an old play or something, and you can kind of create the movie in your mind. And then he also did this, Razored Saddles, which is an older collection, I believe from the late 90s. Again, most of my Lansdale stuff is signed. So this is a collection, 89, and they called this Cowboy Punk, a play off of like cyberpunk or steampunk, but this is like, a collection of early Weird West fiction with authors like Robert McCammon, Joe R. Lansdale, a lot of these guys I'm not, F. Paul Wilson, and I'm not familiar with a lot of the authors in this particular volume. This is kind of hit and miss, maybe more on the miss side. I don't know. It's pretty good. I want to reread it because it's been a really long time since I have read that. Now, I also mentioned at the beginning of this episode that another book in my top 10 or so, maybe top 5, is also sometimes considered a weird Western. I've seen it, at least, and I can see it. And that is The Circus of Dr. Lao by Charles G. Finney. Now, this was made into a terrible, probably somewhat racist movie, because I think they had a white actor playing the Asian character, Dr. Lao, in, I guess you would say, yellow face. Who was, I can't remember who played it, but I might be misremembering that, but I'm pretty sure that the movie has some issues that would be problematic in today's climate here. But The Circus of Dr. Lao is one of the weirdest, most just challenging works of genre fiction I have ever read. It's about a circus that comes into this small town. And the circus is, of course, run by this Asian fella named Dr. Lao. And it is more of a... It's more of a psychological examination of the people in this town and their reaction to seeing things that are foreign and their reaction to seeing things that challenge them. And in that way, it's a very unique book. When was this written? 1935 it was written. That was the first printing, 1935. And it's a very progressive novel, especially for the time it was written. It feels subversive. It challenges conceptions that people have about the other, about the fear of the other. And the characters have to come face to face with things that they may not like about themselves, and they learn about themselves in doing so. So yeah, highly recommend this book. It's oddly structured. It ends on page 100, but then it has this section at the end called the catalog, and it's actually just a short description of every character in the book, and it sheds new light on them to where you go back and you read it and you have the kind of a different perspective. Highly recommend this book. It is, I guarantee you have not, if you haven't read this, you have not read anything like this book at all. Now, Charles G. Finney also wrote another collection of kind of weird ghost type westerns, and that is called The Ghosts of Manacle, and really good. He was a fantastic author. His prose style is challenging, it's unique, it's evocative, and yeah, Charles G. Finney is one of my favorite authors, and he does not get the respect today that he deserves. This book I haven't actually read yet. It's one of the books that I have bought in a collection, mainly because I like the cover, and it's a Weird West, called Six Gun Planet by John Jakes. So I am looking forward to reading that. When was that written or published? 1970. All right, a few others. So this is a series by R.S. Belcher, and it started with Six Gun Tarot, which is the only one I've read out of this series. So I've read the first one. I actually have the book out in my car because I had it at work before the whole COVID thing, and I just haven't brought it in many months. But very good book, very good. The Six Gun Tarot is a great start to this series. It is like a prototypical Weird West. I think it kind of shifts in this final volume here, the Queen of Swords, into more of kind of a weird pirate type thing. But the book, it's well written. He's got another really cool series that's out now, and I for the life of me, I just forgot it. But it's about a brotherhood of truck drivers and delivery people who are in charge of keeping the highways safe from demons and monsters. So R.S. Belcher really likes to incorporate Americana into his genre fiction. and I think he's very good at it. So Shotgun Arcana, or the Six Gun Tarot. I don't know if there's a name for this series or not, but I think it's just called like the Six Gun Tarot series or something like that. But yeah, highly recommend those. Heath Lawrence is another author that I have gotten into in the last few years. I haven't read this particular novel yet, so I haven't read his Weird West, but I've read some of his other horror fiction. So this is called Hawthorne, Tales of the Weirder West. And it is, like I said, I haven't read this one yet, but I've read his other fiction and I like it, so I am looking forward to that. Catherine M. Valenti, fantastic author. She is just, yeah, I love her fiction. It is very cool. So this is her Weird West called Six Guns Snow White, a fully loaded fairy tale. And this is very good. It's the prose style on this. It's a little off-putting at first. There's a rhythm to it that you kind of have to get into. And yeah, but highly recommended that. All right, so I had a little edit there because I forgot a stack of books that I wanted to talk about. Now we're into what I would consider my cream of the crop, my top tier Weird West fiction, and that is going to be two different series. The first of those is by Edward M. Erdelak, and that is called The Merkaba Rider. And you have 4 books in this series. You have Tales of a High Plains Drifter, The Mensch with No Name, Have Glyphs Will Travel, and Once Upon a Time in the Weird West. Now, these books for a long time were totally out of print and very expensive. I did not pay these prices for them, but because I bought them when they were new. But I have seen this book on eBay and on Amazon selling for like $900. It's insane. I don't know if people ever bought it for that, but that's what it was priced at. And I rarely even saw these for sale for many years. I did just do a search recently and they are back in print. So pick these up. Now, this series is one of the most unique book series I've ever read. Erdelak has mixed in American Western fiction with Lovecraftian horror and Hebrew mythology and lore. It is absolutely wild. So the Merkaba Rider is this Jewish mystic cowboy who is riding across America trying to find his old master and get revenge for something. Each one of these first 3 volumes is actually a collection of episodes. They are pretty much like each one is a novella, and each one kind of deals with, you have just a Western setting with Cthulhu mythos, and then also just a kind of esoteric Kabbalistic knowledge and Hebrew folklore. And you will get a glossary in the back that goes through a lot of the, numerous Hebrew, Yiddish, and Aramaic terms necessarily find their way into the Chronicles of the Rider. And so you can look up any terms that you may not know. Let's see what's the entry for the Merkaba Rider. A Jewish mystic able to leave his physical body and explore the upper and lower worlds of heaven and hell through the study of various Solomonic and Hebrew magical texts. The Merkaba, or Merkava, is the fiery chariot of the Lord revealed to Ezekiel in a vision. So I love religious themed science fiction, and this is very much a religious themed Weird West that is super dark, super creative, incredibly well written. Yes, highly recommend, especially if you're into Shadows of Brimstone. This is like Shadows of Brimstone, the series. I mean, unbelievably good. And that it's even better than all that it's back in print. small little tangent here. This series actually led me to this book here called Hebrew Punk, which are kind of like extreme stories using Hebrew and Jewish folklore in their telling. So pretty cool. I like that. I like that it's called Hebrew Punk, kind of a play off of, cyberpunk, steampunk, and that whole kind of thing. But little did you know, there's a whole subgenre of genre fiction that deals with Hebrew folklore. That is pretty cool. And then finally, or we'll leave one book, but finally, my favorite book series of all time. I've read the whole series 7 times. I try to reread it every other year or so. And that is Stephen King's The Gunslinger and the Dark Tower series. Just an absolutely epic Weird West that encapsulates and incorporates the entire universe of Stephen King fiction into its pages. I want to do a video series at some point on the Dark Tower because I could just talk about this series for days and days. Now, I did not read it as it was being published because I kind of have a standing rule that I don't start a series until the author is finished with it. And so I started the series when book 6 was published and book 7 was coming out. And I got to read the entire series back to back, 7 books of it in a single year. And it was probably the best reading experience I've ever had in my life. So more on this series and book to come, I'm sure. And then finally, I just picked this up. I've hardly had a chance to read it, but the Encyclopedia of Weird Westerns. This is something that I'm going to use because I want to expand my knowledge into Weird Westerns and find out more books and things to read and enjoy. So this is supernatural and science fiction elements in novels, pulps, comics, films, television, and games. This does kind of deal with everything. You do get a really good introduction to the genre written by Cynthia J. Miller. I don't know who that is, but it seems like a really good introduction. And so I'm sure this will help and facilitate my knowledge of the genre and giving me some more places to start. Because as you can tell, I went through, a couple stacks of books, but there are just dozens of examples in all across mediums of film, television, comic books, video games, novels, short stories, television shows. The Weird West is a vast and wide genre that incorporates just a ton of things that I like. And so really looking forward to diving into that and learning more about this genre. So that was it. That was a somewhat long-winded examination of Weird West fiction, all inspired by our love for Shadows of Brimstone, the game. So, all right, guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this, and there will be more videos about books coming up, because I am kind of in a book reading mood right now, and I know I have gotten some people expressing interest in me doing more videos on books. I know some people don't like them. They don't get as many hits and likes as my board game things do, but it is another hobby that I'm into that I want to explore on this channel. So, all right, guys, well, we'll talk to you later, and take it easy. If you know of any great Weird West, maybe you read Jonah Hex is a comic book, and that was actually kind of Joe R. Lansdale has written some Jonah Hex stuff. But yeah, if you know of any, or if you love Weird Westerns or straight Westerns, and you have some recommendations for me, let me know, because I'm always looking for great examples to read. So, all right, guys, we'll take it easy, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.